I don't remember the priest's words, only the flowers. The white lilies stank of hospitals and apologies, and every time the air moved, their petals brushed my wrist like someone whispering, "Hush." I was standing too close to my father's coffin, too close to a face that had arranged the world into neat columns and made sure we all lived inside them. A brass crucifix gleamed on his chest. Beneath it, tucked under the prayer card with his birth date in italic script, was an envelope with my name, Mara. I didn't open it during the funeral. I held it. I could feel the paper throb against my palm as if it had a pulse, as if it had waited all these years. Across the aisle, Theo was the picture of a dutiful eldest son, jaw set, shoulders squared, tie the same navy as our father used to wear in court. Leda sat beside him, hands folded, the diamond on her third finger so clean it could cut air. She wasn't my mother. Her presence had always felt like a replacement part, polished, efficient, wrong. Elias leaned against the far pew, 20 and skittish, a knot of grief he didn't know how to hold. He had our mother's eyes, even if he barely remembered her. Sometimes I watched him to see what grief looked like when it was new. Mine was old. Mine was organized. After the last condolence, after the last casserole and the last soft, well-meaning lie, I took the envelope to the laundry room sink, where the house smelled like bleach and unspoken things. I slit it open with my thumb. It was a single page in my mother's hand. "Mara, if you want the truth, look for the ledger with the red ribbon. Don't let your father bury it again." The script stopped there, a cliff she had stepped off or been pushed from. The page trembled in my grip, the way the curtains had trembled the night the fire ate our kitchen. Then, 1999. The night before the fire, my mother stood at the stove stirring tomato sauce. I stood on a chair because I wanted to be as tall as her. She had flour on her cheek and a new bruise under her eye shaped like surprise. "Accidents leave fingerprints," she said, but she was laughing. Because in our house everything tragic had to be disguised. Now, the night after the funeral, I waited until the house emptied and their voices receded like an outgoing tide. Then I went to my father's study, the room that smelled like old money and older fear. Nothing had ever been out of place there. All the pens parallel, all the cases locked. But death ruins a man's borders. The bottom left drawer resisted, then broke open under persistent faith. Inside, a worn leather book tied with a red ribbon, the knot so tight it had left a dent in the spine. Elias was at the doorway before I could breathe. "Don't," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. He'd grown so tall I had to look up to see the boy still inside his face. "You knew," I said. He stepped in, shut the door softly behind him. And our father's study was a sealed compartment, air thinning by the second. "Everybody knows something," he said. "That's how this family breathes." We undid the ribbon together. The ledger splayed open like a wound that had been held shut too long. Names, dates, payments written in my father's unforgiving hand. There were amounts that would have bought houses, and there were notes that could have bought silence. Along the margins, someone, my mother, had drawn small ash leaves, as if marking what the fire had taken. One line snagged the eye like barbed wire. May 3rd, 1999, Inspector Renfrew, $20,000. Cause of fire revised to accidental. Next to it, in that same precise hand, "Protect MI was not a woman who cried. I was the woman who did the taxes, who kept the minutes at meetings, who knew the exact height of every wave that had hit this family, and where the waterline still stained the walls." But my throat burned. "He paid to bury it," I whispered. "He paid to bury her." Elias touched the note with one fingertip. "Protect M," he read. "Is that you?" "I don't know," I said, which was a lie. In our house, the letter M had been a mirror. We didn't hear Leda enter. We felt her. The way you feel a storm change the air pressure before it breaks. "That ledger doesn't belong to you," she said, soft and lethal. She had taken off her shoes. Her feet were bare on our father's carpet, like she belonged to this ground more than any of us. "Neither do half the things in here," I said, and it was a relief to speak without the funeral's velvet. "How long have you known?" Her mouth twitched. "Long enough to know you shouldn't go looking for what you cannot carry." The ledger lay open between us, a single steady heartbeat keeping us all alive with danger. "What happened to my mother?" I asked, a flicker in Leda's face. Most people thought she was a gold digger who had struck a vein. Only occasionally did I think she was a woman who had learned to live inside a mine. "Your mother was brave," she said at last, "and your father was proud." They loved you in the ways they understood. Some loves don't translate. I'm not asking for poetry, I said. I'm asking for facts. She pointed to a later entry. July 14th, 1999. Renfrew, additional retainer, $10,000, custody petition withdrawn. You think that says what you think it says? She said. But you should see the page that used to live between those entries. Used to, I said. He tore it out, she said. Years ago. Then it's gone. Nothing is ever gone, she said. Not in this family. It's only misfiled. Then childhood. The night of the fire I watched from the stairs. My father's back was a wall. He held my mother by the wrists, then by her apology. There was a glass shattered under the table, and tomato sauce dried into a map on the floor. Flames start quietly like gossip. It was the curtains first, and then the oak cabinets, and then us. My mother shoved me toward the back door, and my father yanked me to the front hall. Elias was a baby. Theo was out later was not even a rumor. The fire inspector said the candle near the window had been careless. We all nodded. It had been the easiest story. Now that night, with the ledger's weight printing its numbers onto my palms, I understood what those payments meant. It wasn't relief. It was recoil. It wasn't clean anger, but something dirtier. The knowledge that truth had always been for sale, and that our father was as fluent in purchasing it as any man who had ever been called respectable. Over. The next week I hunted for the missing. Page the way some people hunt for God. I emptied the attic of its trunks. I slid my arms deep into the insides of couch cushions. I ran my fingers along the undersides of drawers for false bottoms. I moved through our house like a priest through a desecrated church, inventing a new liturgy for every hidden sin. Theo watched me with a look I remembered from childhood board games, the one he wore when he knew the winning move 2 turns before you did. "You're rummaging," he said one night, leaning in the pantry doorway, tie loosened just enough to make him look merciful. "That's what losers do after the rules are set." "The rules change when you're dead," I said. "They change when the will is read," he said. "And that's tomorrow at 10. At the will reading, the lawyer's voice was smooth as polished wood. Our father had left the house and the majority share of the construction company to Theo, with an advisory role for Leda, a trust for Elias, filed under my name, a scholarship fund in perpetuity for girls studying accounting. It was a blade disguised as a bouquet. After, Theo clapped my shoulder. "Dad always said you had a head for numbers, but not for business," he said, kind as a knife. "You'll do something meaningful with the fund." I smiled until my molars ached, because by then I had already done something else. I had copied the ledger. I had sent the copies to the DA's office with a note that the inspector who had revised the cause of a fatal fire had been on our father's payroll. I had included everything except the missing page, which I didn't have. My fingers had hovered over the send button like a divining rod over water. The email had left my account like a confession. Revenge, I discovered, doesn't arrive as a plan. It arrives as a pulse. It is the body refusing to carry what it cannot live with. Leda found me that evening under the ash tree in the yard. The tree had survived the fire. It grew out of the scar like a dare. She came barefoot again, like the ground kept secrets with people who didn't wear shoes. In her hand, a folded paper thin as a breath. "I told you nothing is gone," she said. "My hands wouldn't take it." "Where was it?" "In the sleeve of your father's coat," she said. He'd sewn an extra seam along the lining. He loved a hidden pocket. He said it made him feel prepared. The paper unfolded with a whisper. The date at the top was May 4th, 1999, the day after the first Renfrew payment. The handwriting was my father's, but it had an earthquake in it, meeting with Renfrew. He insists the girl would be charged if cause stands. The candle, M's candle. She left it lit when she hid in the stairwell. She tried to help. Ruth went back in for Elias and tripped. "Protect M, always protect M, I will carry this." I read the paragraph again and again. The words were simple. Their arrangement rearranged the floor. I had not left the candle lit to be cruel. I had been 12 and tired of being smaller than fire. I had lit it because I had wanted the kitchen to look like the photographs in magazines, where light softened everything hard. I had hidden in the stairwell because my father had shouted and my mother had laughed the wrong laugh. It had been my fire. He had paid to call it an accident. He had paid to carry my sin in his wallet. He had built a life the town could admire, while his own house smelled like a lie. He had disinherited me with a scholarship for girls who liked numbers because he thought that was kindness. that I would be saved by distance and arithmetic. You wanted a villain you could bury, Leda said quietly. It's easier to put a man in the ground if he's guilty of everything. He was guilty of many things. He is not guilty of all of them. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to fold the paper back into its seam and pretend I hadn't seen it. I wanted to keep the clean, bright anger that had powered me through a week of searching and sending and finally sleeping without dreams. But the ash tree above us shed a single leaf onto my shoulder, and it felt like an absolution I did not deserve. Why give this to me? I asked. Because you already sent the ledger, she said. She looked at me with those clear, cold eyes the town had called opportunistic, and I had learned to fear. Don't lie, not to me. Not when I taught you where he kept the scissors. I closed my palm around the paper, as if I could wring a different truth from it. You could have kept this. You could have let me live in my story. You're not a kind woman. No, she said. I'm a survivor. There's a difference. I don't give things back unless it keeps something else alive. What are you keeping alive? Your chance to choose, she said. She looked up into the ash leaves, and perhaps the part of him that wasn't a monster. Elias appeared at the edge of the yard, hands shoved in his hoodie, face open in a way that made me want to put my hand on the back of his neck the way our mother used to, just to feel that he was here. They're saying on the news there's an investigation, he said. Theo's with the lawyer. He said you did this. I couldn't form the word yes, so I didn't try. I handed him the page. He read it, and his mouth softened around a pain he'd thought had a different shape. Do you remember the night of the fire? I asked. He shook his head. I only remember afterward. The way Dad held me like I was something he'd stolen and was waiting to be caught with. After he went inside, Leda leaned against the tree the way you lean against a person when you're too tired to pretend the ground is enough. The DA will dig, she said. They will find that inspector's widow and ask why there's an extra account with summer camp money for a child who never had a summer. They will ask why your father met a fireman at the diner at midnight. They will ask what kind of man pays for truth and calls it mercy. What kind of daughter sends the men with questions to his door after he's under it? I asked. The kind who was taught that survival is a math problem, she said. The kind who was told that the ledger matters more than the heart. He taught you that. I only enforced it. I can call the DA, I said. I can explain. You can, she said. But you won't. You want what you want. What do I want? She smiled then, not kindly, not cruelly. To stop breathing smoke. To make someone else cough. When she left, I sat under the ash tree until the light went because I needed darkness to make any decision. At some point, Theo came to the back steps and watched me. And when our eyes met, I saw a boy who had been taught to carry a different load. Never fail, never flinch, never forgive. He wasn't a villain either. He was a son. What are you going to do? He asked. Finish what I started, I said. My voice surprised me. It had our father's steadiness and our mother's edge. Even now, he asked, nodding at the paper in my hand. Especially now, I said. He shook his head. A soundless laugh. A small surrender. We were never going to save each other, were we? Maybe we were only meant to keep the other from becoming what we feared, I said. It was the closest to mercy I had. I went into the kitchen, which had been rebuilt after the fire to look like the old one, as if we could rehearse our way back to the moment before the match. I set the single page over the gas burner. Flame caught greedily, a creature that remembers the way home, the edges curled, blackened, lifted as if trying to fly. I held it until heat reached my fingers, and pain became instruction. The house filled with the faintest smell, smoke and tomato and something like forgiveness. Later, when the DA's office called, I answered their questions with the calm of a woman who has done what she came to do. I did not mention the missing page. I did not mention the way my father's hand had trembled when he wrote my initial. I did not mention that revenge, once loosed, has its own accounting and refuses to be refiled under anything but action. Weeks passed. The headlines flowered and died. Inspector Renfrew's name surfaced like a body and then sank beneath newer scandals. Theo weathered interviews, jaw set, shoulders squared. Our father's tie a flag he refused to lower. Later wore black longer than custom required, and then wore something blue that made the town talk again, because survival is a costume as much as it is a habit. Elias enrolled in classes, accounting of all things, and every so often I saw him look at numbers with the hunger of someone who has seen what they can hide and what they can heal. We sold the old house. I kept the ash tree in a pot on my apartment balcony, as if you could domesticate something that had learned to live off combustion. On the last night before the house changed hands, I walked through the empty rooms and listened. Houses remember. They keep a ledger that no one can audit. In the kitchen, I stood where the curtains had once trembled. I whispered I'm sorry and the room didn't forgive me, which felt honest. There's a version of this story where I confess everything on the courthouse steps and the town forgives me, and we build a new kind of family, the kind made of scar tissue and truth. There's a version where I become my father, crisp and controlled, and I never light another match. There's a version where Theo and I learn a language that isn't made of rivalry, where Leda and I share a brittle peace, where Elias doesn't flinch when someone drops a glass. The version we have is messier, a scholarship fund with my name on it that sends girls into rooms where they are the only ones who know what things really cost. A brother who chooses the company our father built and tries to sand its edges. A stepmother who brings pie to court reporters and remembers birthdays because kindness is a tool. A boy who learns to love columns without letting them cage him. A daughter who burned the page that might have saved the man who saved her. Sometimes late I take the ledger out of the safe where I keep it. I run my thumb over the dent the red ribbon left in its spine. I think of my mother's handwriting, the way her letters leaned as if into wind, and I wonder what she would have told me to do. Protect them, he wrote. He did. He also harmed everyone in the process. Both are true. Some truths don't cancel each other. They sit side by side until you either go blind or learn to see. When people ask me now what kind of family we were, I tell them we were the kind that survived. I don't tell them that survival is not the same as goodness. I don't tell them that revenge tastes clean only in the first swallow. And then it tastes like smoke you can't cough out. At night, when the city is quiet, a wind moves through the ash leaves on my balcony, and they whisper the sound the lilies made against my wrist at the funeral. Hush. I lay my palms on the ledger and feel its old heat. I sleep, and in the morning I count. Was it justified? Maybe. Was the family broken? It always was, just not in the places we pointed to. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, please like it. Leave your comments below, subscribe to Silent Revenge Tales for the next Silent Revenge account.